Welcome to Part 3 of the all prisoners who have been executed in Florida since 1979. If you have not watched Part 1 and 2 before, please check the links in the comments section. Anthony Braden Bryan. On August 3, 1983, Bryan and accomplice Sharon Cooper abducted 60-year-old night watchman George Wilson from his trailer in Pascagoula and forcibly drove him to a remote area in Santa Rosa County, where Bryan shot him in the face with a shotgun. Physical evidence included the recovered shotgun shell, Wilson's submerged car found in a nearby river, and Cooper's testimony. Bryan was arrested months later on outstanding warrants and formally charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and robbery. At trial, the prosecution relied on Cooper's eyewitness account, Bryan's written confession, and ballistic and fingerprint matches, while the defense argued he was not the shooter. A jury convicted him and unanimously recommended death on May 16, 1986. All state and federal appeals were denied. On February 24, 2000, at 7:11 p.m., Bryan became the second inmate in 2 days executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison. His IV lines filled as family watched through a one-way mirror. He offered no formal last words, but thanked his family and spoke briefly of his faith to his spiritual advisor. Bryan declined a special last meal, receiving only the standard prison breakfast tray. Benny Eddie Dempse. In 1971, Dempse and an accomplice broke into a rural Lake County home, shot real estate agent R.N. Brinkworth and client Celia Pulick, and fled with a stolen safe. Brinkworth wandered into the grove and was killed with his client, while Pulick's husband survived to identify Dempse. After Furman v. Georgia briefly halted executions, Dempse was returned to death row in 1976 for stabbing fellow inmate Alfred Sturgis to death in prison, prompted by Sturgis's status as an informant. Convicted of Sturgis's murder in 1977, Dempse's initial death sentence was twice stayed before the Florida Supreme Court, and U.S. Supreme Court refused further review. On June 7, 2000, he was executed by lethal injection. Witnesses later reported concerns over procedural delays and bruising from vein access attempts. Dempse maintained his innocence and claimed he was framed, but made no consistent final statement. His last meal, consumed at 11 a.m., included barbecue chicken and beef, French fries, salad, ice cream, and mango banana pudding. Thomas Harrison Provenzano. On January 10, 1984, Provenzano entered the Orange County Courthouse in Orlando, armed with a shotgun, revolver, and assault rifle, intending to kill the bailiff who had charged him with disorderly conduct. He opened fire when 2 bailiffs approached. Deputy William Arnie Wilkerson died instantly. Deputy Harry Dalton suffered mortal head injuries and died in 1991, and Corrections Officer Mark Parker was paralyzed and later died of complications in 2009. Arrested at the scene, Provenzano was tried in 1985, where forensic ballistics, weapon matching, and his own confessions formed the prosecution's case. The defense's insanity plea was rejected. After multiple stays, citing his messianic delusions, and appeals up to the U.S. Supreme Court, his final clemency petitions failed. On June 21, 2000, after a last-minute stay was denied, Provenzano was executed by lethal injection at 6:52 p.m. He declined his last meal of a chicken salad sandwich and cookies and offered no vocal final statement, remaining calm as the drugs took effect. Dan Patrick Hauser. In the early hours of January 1, 1995, Hauser lured 21-year-old exotic dancer Melanie Rodriguez from a Fort Walton Beach strip club to his Econo Lodge room, where he strangled her with his bare hands and left her body under the bed. Motel records tied him to room 223. His fingerprint was on a cigarette pack at the scene. and Rodriguez's keys and undergarments were found in his truck. Arrested in Nevada on a fugitive warrant in February 1995, Hauser confessed during interrogation, citing conscience and pressure from his parents, and pled nolo contendere in November 1995. He waived a jury sentencing, declined to present mitigating evidence, and the trial judge imposed death. State and federal appeals were foregone by Hauser himself. On August 25, 2000, at 6:08 p.m., Hauser was executed by lethal injection. He made no final statement, merely swallowing deeply as the lethal chemicals entered his veins. He declined a special last meal, eating only the standard prison breakfast served at dawn. Edward Castro. Between 1986 and 1987, drifter Edward Castro fatally stabbed Austin Carter Scott in Ocala and later murdered 2 other men in Central Florida by stabbing. After a traffic stop in January 1987, police recognized Castro's slurred speech and alcohol odor, leading to his arrest. He confessed and directed officers to the victims' vehicles. Tried for Scott's murder in 1988, Castro did not deny the killing, and a jury sentenced him to death. A second trial for another victim initially yielded life, but a Florida Supreme Court remand in 1992 returned him to a death sentence with an 8-4 jury vote. Castro then repeatedly waived appeals and even his own legal counsel. On December 7, 2000, Castro received his final meal, steak, shrimp, ice cream, and cola, before being strapped to the gurney at Florida State Prison. At 6:02 p.m., the lethal injection commenced. He remained composed and uttered no last words as the drugs induced death at 6:15 p.m., Robert Dewey Glock II. On August 16, 1983, Glock and his co-defendant Carl Pugliatti abducted 34-year-old home economics teacher Sherilyn Ritchie from a Bradenton shopping mall, forced her to withdraw $100 at gunpoint, then drove her to a remote orange grove outside Dade City and shot her multiple times until she collapsed, clutching her husband's baseball mitt. Physical evidence included shell casings from both Glock's and Pugliatti's firearms, the victim's abandoned car and wedding ring, and forensic ballistics linking the weapons to the crime scene. Witness statements and a joint confession corroborated the sequence of events. A New Jersey state trooper stopped their vehicle on August 29, 1983, for an improperly displayed license plate on the turnpike, discovered unlicensed handguns in the glove compartment, and arrested both men. Glock and Pugliatti were charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and robbery. Glock was executed by lethal injection on January 11, 2001, at 6:16 p.m. at Florida State Prison. Witnesses included members of the victim's family and select press, and no last-minute stays were granted. On the gurney, he said, "I killed Mrs. Ritchie. I'm sorry for it. I'm ready to go see Jesus." Then closed his eyes as the procedure began. His last meal, served Thursday morning, consisted of New York strip steak, fried shrimp, green beans, a Coca-Cola, and a bowl of heavenly hash ice cream. He ate it early to avoid procedural delays and used a plastic spoon for security reasons. Rigoberto Sanchez Velasco. In December 1986, Sanchez Velasco, then 27, was babysitting 11-year-old Catixa Kathy Esanaro in Hialeah, Florida. He raped and strangled her to death in her mother's apartment, leaving her body naked and bleeding in her bed. The medical examiner found twisted shirt fabric around her neck, consistent with strangulation and signs of sexual assault, and Kathy's missing gold chains and fur coat provided additional physical evidence. Hialeah detectives, noting Sanchez Velasco was the last person seen with Kathy, tracked him down after friends informed police of his movements. He voluntarily met an acquaintance, who tipped off officers waiting in an unmarked car, leading to his arrest. He was charged with first-degree murder, sexual battery of a victim under 12, and grand theft of personal property. On October 2, 2002, at 9:39 a.m., Governor Bush lifted a temporary stay, and Sanchez Velasco was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison. About 26 witnesses, including the victim's stepmother, observed the procedure. His final statement read, "It does not matter who believes me and who won't believe me. I cannot call myself totally innocent because I have committed all kinds of sins, including murder," spoken calmly before consciousness faded. He declined a special last meal, instead eating the standard prison breakfast tray. No complaints were recorded about the menu. Aileen Carol Warnos. Between November 1989 and November 1990, Warnos murdered 7 male clients along Florida highways, claiming each had attempted to rape her. Ballistic analysis tied a high-standard .22 revolver to multiple crime scenes. On January 9, 1991, Florida Highway Patrol stopped Warnos's vehicle for a traffic violation. Officers linked her to the killings through pawnshop records, fingerprint and DNA evidence, leading to her arrest in Volusia County. The prosecution relied on survivor testimony, ballistics, and pawn records. Defense argued self-defense due to prior assaults, but psychological evaluations of borderline and antisocial disorders failed to sway jurors. In 1992, she was convicted of 6 counts of first-degree murder and received 6 death sentences. Her appeals, including mental competency challenges, were denied through the Florida Supreme Court and U.S. Supreme Court. On October 9, 2002, at 9:47 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, Warnos was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison. She was the second woman executed in Florida since 1976, with her final stay lifted hours earlier. She said, "Yes, I would just like to say I'm sailing with the Rock, and I'll be back, like Independence Day with Jesus. June 6th, like the movie. Big mothership and all, I'll be back, delivered in a defiant religious tone. She waived her $20 budget for a last meal and opted only for a cup of coffee, Deca. Linroy Bodison. In January 1979, Bodison kidnapped 74-year-old postmaster Catherine Alexander at knife point, held her captive in a car trunk for 3 days, tortured her with multiple stab wounds, and ran her over with a vehicle, crushing her to death. Local police linked Bodison through physical evidence and tips. He was arrested shortly after Alexander's body was discovered in Eatonville and charged with first-degree murder and kidnapping. Prosecutors introduced forensic pathology showing defensive wounds and vehicle damage, alongside eyewitness testimony. Defense challenged jury selection and competency but lost before a unanimous 12-0 jury recommendation for death. Multiple competency hearings in 2002 affirmed Bodison understood the proceedings. Florida's Supreme Court denied further relief. Bodison was executed by lethal injection on December 9, 2002, at 5 p.m. at Florida State Prison. Witnesses included the victim's family, who sat in the front row, and no unusual complications occurred. When asked for a final statement, he replied simply, "No, sir," and remained silent as the curtain was drawn. He ate the standard prison supper, beef patties, cheese, and bread, because he had received special meals during previous stays. No special request was made this time. Amos Lee King Jr. In March 1977, King escaped from a work release center and entered the home of 68-year-old Natalie Tilly Brady in Tarpon Springs, where he raped, stabbed, and bludgeoned her to death, leaving her body in a burning house. Brady's fingernails yielded hair, and blood type evidence matched to King. He was arrested days later, charged with first-degree murder, sexual battery, and burglary. The prosecution centered on hair microscopy and blood type matching. Defense sought post-conviction DNA testing and claimed innocence, but appellate courts denied relief, despite several stays to await improved testing. King was executed by lethal injection on February 26, 2003, at Florida State Prison. A brief delay occurred while final appeals were processed, but he was pronounced dead at 6:32 p.m. after a prolonged standoff. His 4-minute statement declared, "I'd like the governor and the family to know I'm an innocent man. I'm sorry for the victim's family for all this that we've gone through," delivered with remorse and a plea for review of evidence. King requested Thai food but was denied. Instead, he received the regular prison meal of smoked turkey sausage, rice, collard greens, pinto beans, cornbread, and cake with icing. Newton, Carlton Slawson. On the night of April 11, 1989, Slawson barged into the Hillsborough County garage apartment, where Gerald and Peggy Wood lived with their small children. Armed with a .357 Magnum, he shot Gerald, Peggy, 8 months pregnant, 4-year-old Jennifer and 3-year-old Glendon, then mutilated Peggy's body and the unborn child. Investigators matched Slawson's weapon, footprints and blood-spattered clothing to the scene, and friends told police he had bragged about the killings. Arrested 2 days later at a Tampa motel, he was charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and killing an unborn child. Jurors heard ballistic experts, surviving family testimony and a taped confession. They voted 12-0 for death, a sentence the Florida Supreme Court affirmed after mental competency appeals were waived. Slawson insisted on execution, firing his lawyers and dropping all further challenges. On May 16, 2003, at Florida State Prison, he chose lethal injection, ate the standard prison fare, no special request, and offered no final words before being pronounced dead at 2:25 a.m. Paul Jennings Hill. A former Presbyterian minister turned militant anti-abortion activist, Hill ambushed Pensacola physician Dr. John Britton and volunteer escort James Barrett outside the Ladies Center Clinic on July 29, 1994, firing a pump-action shotgun at point-blank range and wounding Barrett's wife. Eyewitnesses, surveillance video, and Hill's own televised justification secured his arrest within minutes. He was charged with 2 counts of premeditated murder and attempted murder. Representing himself, Hill called no mitigation, framing the shootings as defensive action. The jury deliberated 20 minutes before recommending death. Automatic appeals failed, and Hill later waived collateral review. Governor Jeb Bush signed the warrant in 2003. On September 3, 2003, he ate a char-broiled steak dinner with broccoli, baked potato, salad, orange sherbet, and iced tea, then faced lethal injection. Final words, "May God help you to protect the unborn as you would want to be protected." Johnny Lourdes Robinson. After Beverly Street George's car broke down on I-95, August 11, 1985, Robinson and a teenage accomplice abducted her, drove to a cemetery, raped her, and shot her twice in the face. Ballistics, fibers from Robinson's car, and the teen's corroborating account secured an arrest 4 days later following another assault. A 1986 jury found Robinson guilty of murder, rape, kidnapping, and armed robbery. The first death sentence was overturned for prosecutorial misconduct, but a 1989 resentencing reinstated death. Appeals alleging racial bias, low IQ testimony recantations, and challenges to lethal injection protocol all failed. Lethal injection was carried out on February 4, 2004. Last meal, fried chicken gizzards, French fries, smoked sausage, and butter pecan ice cream. Final words, delivered with a grin, "Yep, later." John Richard Blackwelder. Serving life for child molestation at Columbia Correctional Institution, Blackwelder lured inmate Raymond Wigley into his cell, May 6, 2000, bound him and strangled him, later telling investigators he wanted the state to kill him. He pleaded guilty, refused mitigation, and urged jurors to recommend death, which they did unanimously. He waived every appeal. The Florida Supreme Court upheld the conviction, noting his competence to volunteer for execution. On May 26, 2004, he asked for a Supreme Combo pizza with onions, peppers, mushrooms, ground beef, a salad, and a Coke. Because a late stay was lifted, he ultimately received only the prison's Sloppy Joe tray. Strapped to the gurney, he said, "I'm proud to be a Christian, and I thank you, Jesus, for saving me and allowing me to come home. Amen." Death was pronounced at 6:13 p.m. Glenn James Ocha. Ocha met convenience store clerk Carol Skierva in Kissimmee on October 24, 1999. After consensual sex at his house, he bound, beat, and hanged her, concealing the body in an entertainment center. He confessed when arrested for public intoxication the next day. Pleading guilty, he waived a penalty-phase jury. The judge imposed death, finding HAC and sexual battery aggravators. Ocha dismissed his attorneys and abandoned appeals, repeatedly requesting an execution date. On April 5, 2005, he ate fried chicken breast, potato salad, kernel corn, 2 biscuits and Pepsi, took a Valium, apologized to the victim's family, and accepted lethal injection, dying at 6:09 p.m. Clarence Edward Hill. During a Pensacola bank holdup on October 19, 1982, Hill shot Officer Stephen Taylor in the back of the head and wounded Officer Larry Johnson. Fingerprints on a stolen getaway car, eyewitnesses, and Johnson's testimony sealed the case. A 1983 jury recommended death. 5 aggravators outweighed Hill's youth and troubled upbringing. Hill spent decades litigating, winning a 2006 U.S. Supreme Court ruling, Hill v. McDonough, that allowed civil rights challenges to lethal injection drugs, but federal courts ultimately rejected his claim. Waiving a special menu, he refused the regular ham and greens tray. On September 20, 2006, he offered no last statement. Lethal injection ended his life at 6:12 p.m. Arthur Dennis Rutherford. Rutherford bludgeoned neighbor Stella Salomon with a dumbbell and drowned her in her Milton bathtub, January 1985, to steal $1,700, forging checks to buy a pickup. Fingerprint match checks, pawn slips, and his wife's testimony led to arrest. Convicted of first-degree murder, burglary, and grand theft, he was condemned in 1986. Multiple appeals argued ineffective counsel and new forensic opinions, but were denied. On October 18, 2006, Rutherford's last meal was fried freshwater catfish, fried green tomatoes and eggplant, hush puppies and sweet tea. He looked at witnesses and said, "I have nothing to say." Lethal injection followed. Death at 6:17 p.m. Danny Harold Rowling. Dubbed the Gainesville Ripper, Rowling terrorized the University of Florida community in August 1990, murdering and mutilating 5 students in 4 days, posing bodies for shock effect. DNA from semen, matching blood type, and tool marks from his campsite tied him to the crimes. He was already jailed for an Ocala robbery. Rowling pleaded guilty before trial. A unanimous jury recommended death. He later confessed to 3 earlier Shreveport murders. Appeals focused on mental health disorders but failed. On October 25, 2006, he ordered lobster tail with butter. Moments before the drugs flowed, he sang a gospel hymn, declined a formal statement, and was pronounced dead at 6:13 p.m. Angel Nevs Diaz. Barely 2 months after Danny Rowling's lethal finale, Florida wheeled a second gurney into the Rayford death chamber for Angel Nevs Diaz, a Puerto Rican escape artist who had already slipped out of 2 prisons before drifting to Miami's neon underworld. In 1979, prosecutors said Diaz and an accomplice trapped strip club manager Joseph Nagy in a holdup and shot him dead, leaving only a blood-flecked matchbook and one smudged fingerprint to mark the killer's path. Diaz defended himself at trial, threatened witnesses, and still drew death on an 8-4 vote. On December 13, 2006, he entered the chamber stoic, refusing the institutional tray of shredded turkey tacos and iced tea that qualified as a special meal. The first needle pierced clean through his vein, chemicals seeped into tissue, and the execution dragged on for 34 grisly minutes, so long that Governor Jeb Bush halted all Florida killings for 15 months afterward. Glaring through the glass, Diaz declared, "The state of Florida is killing an innocent person. This is vengeance, not justice," before the second dose stilled him. Mark Dean Schwab. When the curtain lifted on July 1, 2008, witnesses saw the man whose crime had haunted Cocoa Beach for 17 years. Fresh out of prison in 1991, Schwab posed as a newspaper photographer, befriended 11-year-old Johnny Rios Martinez, then bound, raped, and strangled him inside a U-Haul truck parked in scrubland. At trial, jurors heard taped confessions and gruesome forensic testimony, hair fibers, ligature marks, sand in the boy's lungs, and voted death. Schwab's appeals paused statewide executions after Angel Diaz, but once protocols were rewritten, his warrant was first in line. Hours before dying, he devoured 2 fried eggs, 4 strips of bacon, hash brown patties, and buttered toast washed down with strawberry milk. Asked for last words, he stared at the ceiling and whispered, "I have spoken enough." 7 minutes later, Florida's machinery of death sputtered back to life. Richard Henyard. On January 30, 1993, 18-year-old Henyard and his 14-year-old accomplice, Alphonsa Smalls, abducted Dorothy Lewis and her daughters, Jamelia, 7, and Jasmine, 3, from a supermarket parking lot in Eustis, Florida. There, both men raped Dorothy Lewis on the trunk of the car while her daughters remained inside. Henyard then shot Lewis multiple times, including in the leg, neck, mouth, and forehead, leaving her for dead. Henyard was arrested the following day after voluntarily approaching the police, initially providing a false account, but eventually confessing to his involvement. In 1994, he was convicted of multiple charges, including 2 counts of first-degree murder, and sentenced to death. On the day of his execution, Henyard declined to make a final statement. His last meal consisted of 2 fried chicken breasts, turkey sausage, fried rice, chocolate chip cookies, and Coca-Cola. He was pronounced dead at 8:16 p.m. Wayne Charles Tomkins. Tomkins' date, February 11, 2009, closed a saga that began beneath a Tampa bungalow porch in 1984. Detectives, tipped by a psychic and Tomkins' nervous cellmate, dug through sandy loam and found the skeleton of 15-year-old Lisa Deca wrapped in her pink bathrobe. The sash, still knotted, had become the murder weapon. Though no physical trace linked him directly, jailhouse admissions and incriminating timelines convinced jurors. Tomkins fought on innocence claims until Governor Charlie Crist signed a 3rd death warrant. That evening, he polished off fried chicken and a towering banana split ice cream cup, eating it with the single plastic spoon prison rules allowed. When the blinds rolled up, he muttered, "I'm good." And 8 minutes later, the curtain fell on Florida's 66th lethal injection casualty, John Richard Merrick. The Broward Turnpike kidnap of Adela Simmons in 1983 was so random it chilled travelers for decades. A stalled car, 2 drifters offering help, then a 60-mile detour to a desolate Dania Beach access where Simmons was sexually assaulted, strangled with a bandana and set ablaze. Merrick blamed his cohort, but tire impressions, gas receipts, and witness sightings shredded the story. After 26 years of litigation, including 2 stays within hours of execution, Merrick entered the chamber on August 19, 2009. For his $40 limit, he chose a BLT on wheat, onion rings, fries, and a can of Dr. Pepper. "Jesus, remember us sinners," he prayed aloud, reciting the Lord's Prayer until the paralytic stilled his lips. Martin Edward Grossman. Wildlife Officer Peggy Park stopped Grossman's stolen handgun-laden car on Pinellas County's Wildlife Road in 1984. He pistol-whipped her, wrested her .357, and fired a fatal shot behind her ear. Supporters later painted Grossman as a brain-damaged teen on barbiturates, but evidence, ballistics, bruised knuckles, girlfriend's testimony held firm. 30,000 clemency pleas reached Governor Christ. All failed. On February 16, 2010, Grossman skipped the ceremonial feast, raiding the canteen instead for a fried chicken sandwich, fruit punch drink, and banana cream cookies. He recited Hebrew Psalms with a rabbi, whispered apologies to Park's family, and at 6:17 p.m. became Florida's 69th modern execution. Manuel Alias Valet Jr. Valet was 27 when he gunned down Coral Gables officer Louis Pina during a 1978 traffic stop in a stolen Camaro, one blast to the face, another to the heart, as Pina's partner sprinted for cover. The Cuban-born fugitive fled to Miami Beach, where a waitress recognized the stolen license tag and phoned police. 2 trials, a resentencing and protracted drug protocol challenges delayed justice for 33 years. Finally, on September 28, 2011, Valet ate fried chicken breast, white rice, garlic toast, peach cobbler, and a Coke, meeting quietly with his daughter and a Catholic chaplain. He offered no final statement. The new pentobarbital cocktail stopped his heart at 7:14 p.m., Florida's first use of the drug. That's the end of Part 3. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please leave your comments below and do not forget to subscribe to the channel.